Are you looking to get ready, be prepared, and transform your financial future? Then you've come to the right place. This is the Get Ready Money Podcast with Tony Stewart, where Tony has insightful conversations with financial experts who are changing the way we think about money. Catch up on the latest financial trends and hear practical advice from Tony and his expert guests so you can build healthy habits that work. Be empowered with tips for implementing small changes that can have a big impact on your financial future. So sit back and get ready to hear from today's guest.
Welcome to the Get Ready Money Podcast, changing the way we think about money. I'm your host, Tony Stewart. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Joshua Wilson, host of the Untamed Ethos podcast, coach, and speaker. Joshua helps advisors integrate financial behavior into client relationships. Joshua, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Tony. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, great to have you here. So, let's jump in. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is your origin story, and how did that lead to you becoming interested in behavioral science?
Yeah, Tony. So I grew up on a farm in rural Alabama, just in the middle of nowhere, one TV in the house. So imagination typically came from books. And, my father owned a little junkyard that sat right in front of a landfill in this very rural area. And, I learned, I think very early on that relationships mattered because everything came down to in that little area of what your reputation was. I mean, I could go into the co-op and say, I'm Jerry Wilson's son, and they would send me off with bags of cement and dad would come pay him later. Your who you are really mattered. And, that stuff, things have changed in the digital era. But yeah, I was fortunate enough to get into a great school, Brown in the Northeast. And so that got me off of the farm. I spent the first 18 years trying to get off of the farm, and probably the next 18 trying to get back to a farm. And I in college I studied faith. I studied religious studies, just understanding people and really what their values are and how they relate to the world, how they relate to something deeper. And I personally am a Christian, but I studied broadly on how people relate to something deeper. And in getting into the financial services world after that. I know it's a strange leap from going through religious studies into the financial world, but I didn't fit in, Tony. I came from a farm in rural Alabama. My parents didn't go to college. I didn't come from money. I didn't have connections. I didn't have leads. I didn't even know what money meant. I'd never seen a Wall Street Journal before I even got to Brown for my undergrad. I didn't know what CNBC was. I didn't know the stock from a bond. And so just getting a job in financial services was a rude awakening for me. And so I felt this need to prove myself, that I need to show that I belong here. And so I really hid who I was. Is I want to show you I'm smart and I'm qualified. And so I hit the books, man. If there's anything that I knew how to do when I got to Brown, was I knew how to work hard. Got that. You can get that work ethic on the farm. And so I threw myself at getting all of the licenses and credentials and designations that we call them in the financial services industry. And designation is just kind of a fancy word for a specific credential that everybody agrees you're an expert in this one specific area of finance. And I threw myself at that, and it was, to me, polish and grit. If I can be gritty enough to work hard and talk to enough people, if I can convince them that I belong here. So I think a lot of it was just really hiding who I was. And I was doing fine. I started during the Great Recession, which is the worst time to start. So those first few years was just getting my teeth kicked in. What in the world do I need to leave this industry, do something else? And things finally started kind of coming together, and things started going well. And then I grew up at what I call TD. I say I grew up at TD Ameritrade at that firm, and then I went off on my own and started my own firm. Just again, I rented a room in my friend's upstairs so I could lower my expenses as much as possible, so I could bet on myself and start with $0 under management, zero base salary, and build from there. And it was during that time that suddenly I came into a meeting one day and someone said, we Googled you before before this meeting, and we found this speech that you gave, this graduation speech you gave at Brown University. And then they just started talking about that and talking about the things we had in common and what the specific things I said. And I started noticing this happen just here and there. People would Google me and find this. And it wasn't even a video, it was just a written speech at that time. And it got me really interested. It's like, man, when people know who I am and they kind of connect with me beforehand, these meetings go a lot easier. It's almost like they've pre-selected me, and then in the meeting, they're like, okay, is this guy qualified? Does he know what he's talking about? So they're not just like raking me over the coals, and and so it got me really interested in the science of connection, and how do people actually make decisions. And that led me to, after I sold that firm, I turned around another firm and grew it, and I began to start integrating these behavioral lessons into what I was doing. And that led me finally to go back to school and finish a PhD in behavioral finance, which is basically the science of how people make decisions about money, how money affects them psychologically, and how we make errors when we think about money and when we make decisions about money, and what can we do about those things? How does it affect us? And so that's really what got me into it, Tony, is just seeing that, hey, people make decisions emotionally. Traditional finance assumes everybody is rational and tells you what rational decision you should make. But we aren't rational. We're human. We have feelings. We have backgrounds. We have all kind of priorities that are shifting and in different contexts. So that's where I came from, Tony, is just being in the super rational world of finance and economics and realizing that people just don't make decisions that way, and going back to try to figure out how they do. And now I work with firms to help them to kind of understand that as well.
Yeah, well, that's the same conclusion I've come to over the years, is that the numbers have very minimal bearing on so much decision making when it comes to products and services, and that understanding people in and of itself, as you talk about, is what drives change. And so it's interesting that at your first firm, is that it was really, once people knew who you were, they were much more comfortable with you as an advisor. So, of course, the big question that I have, and I'm sure everybody is thinking about, what was your speech about at Brown?
Yeah, so my speech was really about the journey of where I came from to Brown. It was kind of a transition, a transformation story. As I got to Brown, I didn't know anything about postmodernism. I didn't know anything about feminism. I didn't know anything about all these things that everybody was talking about. I was just a farm kid from Alabama and didn't really feel like I fit in at all. But so I talk about going to Brown, experiencing. I go back home and I experience it with my mother, talk to her about the lessons that I'm learning. So it's kind of a picture of watching this naive but eager young man go to this area that's so different. And then come to find out that I am a typical Brown student in a lot of ways. And so I found my own, and found where I belonged, and what I had in common with those people. And I found myself both learning from people and teaching people. I think probably what I learned outside of the classroom exceeded what I learned inside of the classroom. And so yeah, allowed me to both share something about a story of where I came from and who I was, but also integrate that into the Brown experience very deeply, and really got to show some appreciation for my parents and my savior, that's meant a lot to me, to be able to honor the things that are most important to me.
Well, and that's important because I think you were being authentic long before talking about being authentic became a thing. I mean,
I kind
because
of stumbled upon that. The funny thing about it, Tony, is I had hid that. I didn't even broadcast that to my hometown, and I'm the first Ivy League graduate in my county's history, and I didn't broadcast that. I didn't send that to the local paper, or There were people that I didn't actually share the speech online. I got a copy of it until my father passed away in 2017. And I talked about him in the speech. As part of what I, so, there's a video, there's part of the video that shows him. And so it wasn't until my father passed away and I wanted to honor him and show him and have this memory with him to commemorate, to share with people, that I even was willing to share that. Because it was just, to me, well, that's who I am. That's not the business, and that's not what makes me credible. That's not what makes me a good investment advisor. It was just like, let's hide all that. And plus, I think this is something that a lot of people struggle with is, you know, where I come from, it's, you're quiet. You don't talk about yourself. It's you talk about other people. You just keep quiet to yourself. You do your duty, and it's very much a humble culture. And so it's almost like talking about yourself is not humble, right? And that's not true. It's not that binary. There is
Yeah.
something you can talk about yourself um, without bragging about yourself or something like that. So yeah, it was definitely something where I stumbled onto something that I didn't quite understand at the time, but I knew how to tell a story.
Well, there we go. It is storytelling, and I think that's the other important thing is people knew the story of who you were, and so that they connected with you as a person, which gave you a lot of credibility. I mean, yeah, as you point out, the designations help, but for the most part, like honestly, I'm not sure what a CMT is. Looking at your credentials, I'm sure you look at my credentials and go, okay, I don't know what those credentials are. So even,
I
for us
saw
in the
I saw
financial
those
service,
letters in that row in my alphabet soup once, 30 years ago.
yeah, it's like, I mean, some of them matter, and it shows that, I think that we as professionals take an interest in further educating ourselves and developing technical expertise. But that, as you point out, is the designations by themselves don't do anything. I mean, I've met people who've had, as with you, who have had, I mean, it seems like 20 different designations, and I don't think it's ever made them necessarily better advisors. Some of them are, and some of them aren't, but it's not the designations, I think, that make a quality advisor.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of like more books on your personal bookshelf. And what I mean by that is books that I can reference when I'm trying to solve a problem for someone. And so, I want to be clear is this is not me railing against higher education by any means. I have a lot of education. But I think it's that sometimes we can, as professionals, become over reliant on it. And also, those of us who maybe didn't have as fast of a start with education, we think we see people with credentials and we're like, well, I don't have a PhD. Well, I don't have a LMNOP or whatever it is after their name. No one's going to trust me. And it's like, well, you know, the perfect person obviously has it all, right? Everybody, and I saw this. The NFL draft was recent, and I saw this high level commentator, and he was talking about evaluating these prospects. Now, it's only a couple hundred guys getting drafted every year, and most of those never play it down on the field, right? So you're really all the best players in college, they're getting just run over the coals, and all of their little things are being pointed out. Well, he's not quite tall enough. He's not quite fast enough. He's not quite, they're comparing all those things. So, I think that at the end of the day, it's easy to, rake ourselves over the coals over anything, of what we're inadequate about. And so, if we've got a great story, if we can connect with people, we should lean into that. That doesn't mean that we can't go out and, add more books to our personal bookshelf, if you will, so we can add more value. But it's not the barrier probably that a lot of people think. And a lot of people that get those things, they think if they get it, then the clients will come. And the expertise of serving a client is not necessarily the same thing as connecting with a client in order to get that client. Right. And so you got to get them. You got to get the client. They've got to trust you. They've got to come in the door and actually be willing to pay you money to work with you before any of those credentials matter.
Yeah, 100%. And I found for the most part, my credentials have met more. within the industry, within the financial services media,
Yeah.
than directly with people. So I know
Yeah.
that was the purpose of the show, to talk about designations, but I think that this is an important part of our conversation. So I hope for people watching and listening is that you're putting this into perspective, that this is really about interpretation. So, let's dive in a little bit deeper. Tell us what really is financial behavior and behavioral science. What does it
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. So we'll start big with just behavioral finance, or sorry, behavioral science in general. Think of it like being a detective of human nature. So behavioral scientists are studying how people actually behave, not how they say they'll behave, or how we wish they would behave, or how they should behave, but how they actually behave. Okay. So we look at how people form habits, how they make decisions, how they interact with others, how they respond to their environment, how an environment can make a difference on a habit, for example. And so oftentimes when we talk about things in binaries. In other words, is it this or is it that? Which one of it? And so a behavioral scientist, we look at this and say, okay, let's get away from this rudimentary thinking of binaries. Is it black or is it white? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it those arguments, and say, okay, it's a formula, it's a recipe. And so something can be 20%, your background, 20% your environment, 30% something else. And so we can understand how these things happen by splitting these things and understanding getting into the real nuance. And so sometimes these things are conscious, right? So sometimes we make decisions consciously, like weighing pros and cons before buying a house, right? Like actually looking and seeing, can I afford this payment? But there's also a lot that happens on autopilot, right? Like, grabbing your phone when you're bored, or clicking add to cart just because something's on sale. So what I love about behavioral science is that it shows up everywhere. Every conversation can turn into behavioral science if you want to dig into it a little deeper. So it's used to help people to save more for retirement, to eat healthier, to make smarter financial decisions, to even on how to design better websites to help people to get engaged or get their attention, draw them in. And so it helps us really stop guessing about what's going to work and how to communicate with people, and start understanding how real people actually think and how they feel subconsciously that drives their behaviors. Because here's the thing, people don't really want to think. They don't really want to think. Thinking is very expensive. It takes energy, and I only have so much of it per day. And so we really want to feel our way through life and only think when we have to. We believe about ourselves that most of our decisions are conscious and on purpose, but in realistic, most of them are made on autopilot.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's like it is much easier to not put that into, to take that energy on a lot of decisions. And that's what they say is like, like Steve Jobs is a perfect example of like somebody who didn't want to spend thinking time on choosing his wardrobe. And
Yes.
and the story is that that's why he always wore jeans and a black turtleneck, is because it removed that decision from his daily, I guess, load. I don't know if that'd be
Yes.
the right word, but
Cognitive load.
so what is the cognitive load, since you brought that up?
Yeah, so it's basically how much can you handle, and how much can you think about it like a computer. Okay, so if you've got a computer and you open up a tab, and you and I were just having this discussion right before we got on. Is, hey, before we start this recording this webinar, I'm going to close out some of the other programs that are going on my computer to make sure that those things aren't sucking up energy, RAM, processing power for this. So I wanted my computer to be able to focus on one thing and not be distracted by trying to power other things. Your brain is the same way. It can only process so many things at a time. This is why we need sleep. Sleep, clean. Sleep is when your brain processes, right? It processes, it cleans things out. It just kind of does a hard restart, a reboot. And so your cognitive load is things like the things that are unemotional that just have to be done, right? You've got to think about all these different things that are happening. If there's stress involved, that adds to your cognitive load. If there's something unexpected that happens, that adds to your cognitive load. If you're not getting enough sleep, if you're changing time zones frequently, if you all these things are just adding to how much that you can hold, and they're exhausting you. They're costing you power. So I think it's worth to be a good example is the example you gave of Steve Jobs. And let's unpack that for a second. Steve had a lot going on. He's running Apple. We didn't even know it at the time, but he was battling cancer. He's got his own family. He's got all these things going on, and he's working a lot of hours. And so he says, I need to reduce load, things I have to think about as much as possible. Because anything, if I can free, if you are someone who's trying to be ultra productive and you're also trying to be ultra present with your family, ooh, those two things are kind of at the end of the extremes, right? Then you're thinking in terms of how can I remove things that are distracting me? And so he got so you can say obsessed or so efficient with this, where he said, hey, I'm spending time in my closet every morning trying to figure out what I'm going to wear, what I'm going to eat, what workout I'm going to do today. Am I going to do a workout today? Is today a workout day? And so his way of approaching this is say, let's just eliminate all of this and put as much on autopilot as possible, to where even he just wore the same thing every day. The same, I think it was a gray or black t-shirt, I forget, and pair of jeans and sneakers. And so this is my uniform. I don't have to think at all to start my day. I don't have to think about when I go to the gym, this is what I do. I go upstairs and I get on the treadmill. It's just this, it's a list, it's a routine. And so now I'm saving my creativity, my energy. I'm saving it for things that it can act that only I can do. So it prevents me from really wasting energy.
I love that. I think that's so valuable. And I think for all of us, when we're dealing with these things that are overwhelming, is developing patterns instead of creating a new way to do it each time, just adds to the stress instead of saying, okay, well, this is, I know how to do this. I'm just going to get this done the way I've done it without creating a whole plan for every component of our day. Because, in this world, we're all overwhelmed.
We are overwhelmed, and it tends to get worse because we're expected to process more. We're expected to be aware of more, to process more. I politics is one of the things that I have a fringe interest in, Tony, and so I have a good friend that is super into politics, and so we came through the election season, and I could keep up with him on those conversations, and then like we get through the election, and it's like, okay, I'll care again in 2 years when we're electing again, but I care about the big stuff, but just every little story that goes out, I just can't keep up. I can't keep up with that stuff. I'm not going to be able to be informed. So I had to just say, hey, man, we went through election season. I was more interested. I put more of my bandwidth towards that. It actually made sense for me in my career and understanding. But now that I'm not allocating as many resources to staying on top of this as I was before. And I had to get out of that routine because it no longer served me. It served me more during the election season. And now makes sense for me to kind of back off of that. And I think that's a decision that we have to make in a lot of areas of our life, in thinking about, how is behavioral science applicable to me, in my daily routine or daily life. And part of that is understanding my own cognitive load. Am I creating too many things that I have to think about? Can I reduce the amount of things that I have to think about? There's a book that's popular right now by James Clear called Atomic Habits. And part of this in that book is really explaining
partly the science. He doesn't go into explaining it, but it's essentially behavioral science. He talks about if you're trying to create new habits, you should try to bundle those habits together, especially with things that you're already doing. If you already have a habit, can you attach a new habit to it? Right. So, for example, if you're trying to, like, I just can't seem to remember to take my daily vitamin, I just can't do it. I don't know why I can't seem to do it. Okay, then maybe you need to put your daily vitamin next to your toothbrush because you've got, hopefully you have that routine down. Can you
Yeah, that's
attach
another
it?
issue.
Yeah, so can you attach it to a different habit? Can you lump these things together? So it's little things like that people can think about behavioral science as how is it applied to me.
Well, that's awesome. So, you know, I know this wasn't a planned part of the conversation, but I think as you talk about these things, I keep thinking about the role of AI in the financial advisory space. And this is where, as you talk through this, is I'm wondering, do you think that AI can help advisors because it can take some of these sort of routine things that fill up some of our cognitive load and offload it for us?
Yes, absolutely. It will. It will be both a distraction and an amazing tool, and it depends on how one executes it, right? So, from a advantage is yes, we're already seeing this in things like note takers, follow-up tasks, things like that, where AI can go ahead and schedule these so you don't have a highly qualified professional that's spending 20 minutes after an appointment just moving things. Okay, I got to respond to this. I got to put this email. These things are just taking these little things off of them, which should allow them to spend more time in front of humans. Because the financial advisors, their primary value is the time that they spend in front of clients. Right, is actually speaking to their clients. So if we can take more of that little stuff off of them, that's going to be huge. I'm and For our listeners, one of the things I do is advise fintech firms that are actually working with financial advisors and with retail clients on financial services via technology. And one of the things that I look for with working with firms or working with advisors, especially, but also with clients, is how much upfront cost is this? Because something can, you tell me what something can do, it sounds really shiny and sounds wonderful and I want it, but that doesn't mean the implementation is going to go well because there's an investment. And if you tell me this is going to save me an hour a week, an hour a day, wow, that's great. That's 5 hours a week, right? But if it's going to take me 10 hours to be able to get through to be able to really do this well, I'm like, well, I don't really have 10 hours this week or 10 hours over the next 2 weeks. So that can create a barrier even into getting started with something that would ultimately be a great investment. But if people are already strained, then it can be tough to do that. So this is some of the things that we try to solve for and with firms. But I may have got off topic a little bit there. Yes, it's going to be fantastic for financial advisors if they scale if they use the time to talk to more humans, because it can become a distraction of trying to offer more value via technology. And ultimately, technology, the bar for what one gets is just going to go higher. But people don't want to spend all that time looking at technology and processing. They ultimately want someone that's going to hold their hand and help them process this stuff. So.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And where I've seen working with fintechs and what I know about the fintech industry is so much of this stuff doesn't really get used.
Yeah.
Um, or advisors use a few features, or like you said, is like, it sits on the shelves because I know so many financial advisors who still do a lot of work with Excel spreadsheets. I was looking while we were talking for my HP 12C financial calculator that I know a lot of financial planners keep in their desks
Yeah.
and still use because they're familiar, easy to use tools that, as you point out, it's already part of their behavior. and their routine. So it's kind of like, is we are creatures of habit.
Yeah, and here's another thing is from behavioral sciences, we don't assess value in isolation. So what I mean by that is when I'm looking at a tool, I'm not just looking at that tool, I'm looking at how it fits into my life, how it fits into my other processes. So, for example, this is why integrations are so important. When you introduce a new tool, can you integrate that with someone's CRM, which is how they keep up with their clients, right? It's the piece of technology they use to keep up with their clients. How well does it integrate with their financial planning software? These are the kind of the key. How well does it integrate with their email? Because if it's something that's in isolation, right, then that is something that is easily forgotten, right? So the way how much can we integrate this into the way someone's already living their life, which goes back to the point I made earlier, is if you're trying to establish a new habit, put it close to, bundle it with another existing habit. And so you get kind of into that workflow, you get into that group of friends. It's like this, if I don't know you well, I've never met you, but you have a group of guys you go bowling with every week. If I start bowling with you guys, I'm now amongst you, right? And now you and I are probably going to develop a relationship, right? Because now we're in that same kind of crowd, in that same kind of bundle.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Especially what resonates with me is the assessing value in isolation component, is because I think that's the challenge with a lot of these tools is, they don't fit in. But I think it relates to the products and services that are distributed and the regret that people have a lot of times after they get a new product or service. And, I come from the life insurance field, and I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody who regrets a life insurance policy that they purchased. They purchased it in isolation. It doesn't fit in with the rest of their financial journey. And, so they go, okay, well, why did I buy this? And they let it go within the first few years of purchasing it. And, in life insurance case, there's high surrender charges and other challenges. But, you see that all across the financial services board is, it's like this product or service isn't fitting in to everything else that the client is trying to achieve. And then the advisor goes, why is my client not happy with this recommendation that I made?
That's a great point to extend that into the financial conversation about products. I think that's one of the things that will continue to face as long as different financial products have different incentives, for creating them and different types of professionals as well.
Definitely, definitely. Well, Joshua, let's wrap up with what I call the Get Ready Hot Take Trio. These are 3 quick questions to help our listeners change the way they think about money. The first question is, what money myth are you trying to break?
What money myth? So people don't make decisions based purely on facts. We don't. And it's a lot more emotional than you think. We're driven by emotion. We're driven by memory. We're driven by imprintations of just, of things that we've seen in the past, experienced in the past, that we're trying to tiptoe around. We're driven by status. We're driven by fear. And here's the most important part, even when we think we're being logical. We justify decisions with facts. We make decisions and then we justify them. We rationalize them. Most decisions that we make are felt and then rationalized, which is why, because we make something at a core level, a decision at a core feeling, primal level, and then with a part of our brain that doesn't have access to speech. And so then often when we're trying to, someone asks us or we have to explain something, we've got to put it into words. Something that wasn't created with words now has to be put into words. So we're looking for a logical explanation. We don't want to say I felt comfortable. It just felt familiar. We don't want to say that. We want to make them based on on facts and logic, but we really make them based on what feels safe, familiar, inspiring. And so I think both financial advisors who ignore that, they're playing the wrong game, and people who assume that are also deluding themselves. Facts matter, yes, but feelings decide, and trust is emotional.
Yeah, and I think back to the most successful financial planners, insurance agents, whomever, and they're the ones who had solid relationships with their clients and who really knew their clients on a deeper level than just the intake questionnaire that we all go through.
Absolutely. And that's really where, just a little aside, that's the problem that try to help advisors solve. Is a lot of advisors, they have that ability to connect, but sometimes they don't signal that early. So if it takes me 43 minutes in a conversation to get to that connection with you, then guess what? I never get to that, because the world's changed. Used to, you didn't have the information, the advisors had it. So you had to go meet with an advisor to even get the information to what you should be thinking about. Now information is free and there's too much of it. And a lot of it's garbage. So how do I even decide which advisor to talk to? Right. So the game has changed, is you've got to create a connection before you ever meet someone. And so that's really the work that my research and my work with advisors and financial firms is trying to solve, is how do I connect with the right people to send those signals? This is that I am the best for this person. Here's the thing that advisors don't want to hear, though, is you can't be the best for everybody. If you're going to be human, you're going to be magnetic, and magnetic implies polarity. It's about being my best self. Some people are going to love me and some people are going to be right?
Yeah,
But either one is better than being unremarkable and forgotten and blending in.
exactly. Being authentic, going back to where you started. So, let's get out the time machine for a minute. What advice would you give your younger self if you could go back in time, knowing what you know now about money?
Uh, this is a good one. So I would say two things. One would be, when it comes to money, get boring. I was learning so much stuff. The CMT is charter market technician. And it's all about, it's so deep. I got into options and all these things. And, you know, um, I used a lot of time to trade when I didn't have a lot of money to trade with. So even though I was making money, it required me a tremendous amount of time that I should have just put it in something dependable, long-term, aggressive, and forgotten about it. No flashy moves, no chasing trends, just own good stuff and hold it and keep it simple. That's what I would have done, is spend less time managing my investments and worry about it. From a career standpoint, I'd say, when it comes to income, well, I would say spend less time and take less, just be boring with investing. I would say with the income, the career, I'd say take bigger risks, bet on myself earlier, start building equity in something that I can control. You don't need permission to create something valuable. No one has to tell you that you're good enough. You can go out there and fail and do okay and learn so much. So I'd say be boring with my investing, but be bold with my earning potential.
Well, I like that. Be boring with your investing. I'm going to have to uh, make sure I get that quote from the transcript.
You got
To,
it.
that's a money quote right there. But what I think about is a quote from Michael Jordan, and I can't remember exactly the full quote, but he says something like, I failed thousands of times so I can succeed in those times where it's needed.
Love it. Love that.
You know. So to wrap up, what is your number one tip for changing the way we think about money?
Yeah, I think that money gets twisted when people try to use it to meet emotional needs that it was never meant to solve. Money, and this is my opinion. Okay, this is opinion, but money is not the goal. Money is a tool. The goal, in my opinion, is to build a life that reflects your values and to use your money in service of those values. As a Christian, I see money through the lens of stewardship. It doesn't belong to me. It's been entrusted to me. So I feel like if I'm a good steward, if I manage what I have wisely, then I can be entrusted with more, and not to hoard it, but to use for a greater purpose. And I'm not saying, oh, every dollar I come in is going to go towards, no, me and my family, and that's a part of my values, right? But that shift from ownership to stewardship changed everything for me. So I would say we have to stop letting money be twisted in our minds to where it meets an emotional need that it was never meant to solve. And that's why people fear investing. That's why people fear doing, running out of money. They fear things because it's not meant to address these emotional needs. Those only can be met with deeper things.
Definitely. And, I've heard this from so many guests, and I know this from my personal experience, that more money doesn't make people happier. Yeah, it allows you to do certain things, which can be really nice and really cool. But overall, it doesn't lead to a higher degree of happiness. It's just not it. So, Joshua, where can people learn more about you, your coaching business, and check out the Untamed Ethos podcast?
Yeah, so you can visit my website, neubify.com, neubefi.com. There'll be some videos, stories, tools. And if you're a financial advisor or a founder trying to stand out, that's the place to start as well. If you're on LinkedIn, follow me there. I don't only, I've kind of, I come from financial services, so you're right. I do coaching with a variety of different types of professionals. But LinkedIn is the best place to follow me. That's where I'm going to share real-time insights about how to spark trust, smart connection, grow through resonance, not just noise. But yeah, LinkedIn and my website are the two primary places I would look. And in the show notes, I can also leave other social media where I'm active as well. Instagram, I'm active on X a little bit, definitely YouTube. So we can put all that in the show notes.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah. And for everybody watching and listening, all these links will be in the show notes as always. So you can get in touch with Joshua. You can follow him, check out what he's up to. So, Joshua, thanks again for joining us today on the Get Ready Money podcast.
Hey, my pleasure, Tony. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for tuning in,
Yeah.
everyone.
This was awesome. Appreciate the insights. I know we went in a different direction, but I hope that, for everybody watching and listening, that this has been of interest to you. And thank you as always for tuning in to this episode of the Get Ready Money podcast. If you learned something today to change the way you think about money, please be sure to subscribe and to share with a friend. You can also go to tonystewart.com to join the Get Ready movement and to receive my Get Ready newsletter and access to a whole bunch of financial literacy resources. Until next time, let's change the way we think about money.